The police officer smirked as he entered the black judge's courtroom. When the judge revealed what was in the sealed evidence file, every officer in the room turned pale. Judge Michael Thompson stood in his chambers, adjusting his black robe in front of the mirror. His fingers traced the collar, straightening wrinkles that weren't there. The clock on his desk read 8:45 a.m. 15 minutes until the hearing that could change everything. Your Honor, his clerk, Sarah Chun, knocked twice before entering. The case files you requested. Thompson turned, his expression grave. Thank you, Sarah. And the security arrangements? Double the usual. Chief Morris insisted. She hesitated. There's already a crowd gathering outside. Thompson nodded, taking the thick manila folder. The label read Commonwealth v. Davidson, Police Brutality Case, hashtag 2025 CR 0789. His hands tightened on the edges. They're saying things, Judge Thompson. On social media, in the corridors. Sarah's voice trailed off. They always do. Thompson's voice was steady, but his jaw clenched. 20 years on this bench, and some things never change. The sound of footsteps in the hallway drew their attention. Through the frosted glass, they could see figures in police uniforms passing by. Slow, deliberate steps. A message. Judge, Sarah lowered her voice. Officer Reynolds was in the building earlier. He was telling other officers that you... She stopped. That I what, Sarah? That you're only presiding over this case because you're... She couldn't finish. Thompson's reflection stared back at him. Gray peppered his temples, earned through 2 decades of maintaining composure while being the only black judge in a system that still viewed him as an outsider. Because I'm black. He finished her sentence. Well, he's right about one thing. I am black, and I am presiding over this case. He turned from the mirror. But not because of that. The memory of his first day on the bench flashed through his mind. 2005. The whispers, the doubting looks, the accidental use of Mr. Thompson instead of Your Honor. He'd survived it all. A commotion outside drew him to the window. Police cruisers lined the courthouse steps. Officers clustered in small groups, their faces turned upward toward his window. Among them stood Brian Reynolds, his stance aggressive even from this distance. Thompson's desk phone buzzed. Judge Thompson. His assistant's voice wavered. Officer Reynolds is requesting an immediate pretrial conference. He's already in the courtroom. He doesn't have the authority to request that, Sarah protested. No, Thompson agreed, he doesn't. He straightened his spine. But I'll hear him out anyway. That's what this robe means. As he gathered his files, an envelope slid from between the pages, falling to the floor. No return address. He opened it with steady hands. Some benches aren't meant for everyone. Step down while you can. Thompson held the note up to the light. Standard printer paper, standard ink. Nothing traceable. Just like the other threats he'd received over the years. Your Honor? Sarah watched him with concern. Should I call security? Thompson slipped the note into his desk drawer, alongside others he'd received since accepting this case. No need. Let's not give them the satisfaction. He checked his watch. 8:55 a.m. The law doesn't bend to threats, Sarah. Neither do I. The walk to his courtroom felt longer than usual. Officers lined the corridor, their eyes following his movement. Some nodded respectfully. Others turned away. A few, including Reynolds' regular partners, made no effort to hide their sneers. At the courtroom doors, Thompson paused. Inside, he could hear Reynolds' voice, loud and confrontational. If he thinks he can be impartial in this case, he's either lying or delusional. Thompson's hand rested on the door handle. 20 years of maintaining dignity in the face of prejudice had taught him patience. But patience wasn't the same as weakness. He pushed the door open. The conversation inside died immediately. Reynolds stood at the prosecutor's table, his face flushed with anger or embarrassment, or both. Other officers scattered to their seats. Officer Reynolds. Thompson's voice filled the courtroom, carried by years of authority. Since you're so concerned about my ability to be impartial, let's discuss it formally. On the record, Reynolds' face darkened. Your Honor, I didn't mean to. Court is now in session. Thompson's gavel cracked against the sound block. And you will address this bench with the respect it deserves, regardless of who sits here. Is that clear? The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Reynolds's jaw worked back and forth, his hands clenching at his sides. Finally, he ground out, "Yes, Your Honor." Thompson took his seat, acutely aware of every eye in the room. The weight of his robe pressed down on his shoulders, not just fabric, but the responsibility it represented. The next few minutes would set the tone for everything that followed. "Now," he said, opening the case file, "you had concerns about my impartiality. Let's address them properly, shall we?" As Reynolds's face contorted with barely contained rage, Thompson felt the familiar calm of the law settling over him. He'd faced down prejudice with patience and procedure for 20 years. He could do it for 20 more if necessary. But something in Reynolds's eyes, a dangerous gleam of defiance, suggested that patience alone might not be enough this time. The real battle was just beginning. Thompson's fingers traced the edges of the case file. Inside lay evidence that could shake the Boston Police Department to its core. The question wasn't whether he could be impartial. The question was whether the system itself would allow justice to prevail. "Your Honor," Reynolds's voice carried a warning, "you don't want to do this." Thompson met his gaze steadily. "Officer Reynolds, what I want is irrelevant. What matters is what justice demands. Now, shall we begin?" The morning sun streamed through the high windows, casting long shadows across the courtroom floor. In those shadows, 2 decades of progress and prejudice collided, setting the stage for a confrontation that would test not just Thompson's authority, but the very foundations of justice itself. And as he opened the first page of the case file, Judge Michael Thompson knew, after today, nothing would ever be the same. The evidence lay spread across Thompson's desk like a roadmap of corruption. After the morning's confrontation with Reynolds, he'd retreated to his chambers to review the case files alone. His reading glasses sat low on his nose as he examined photograph after photograph of the victim's injuries. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, running a hand over his face. The images showed a young black man's bruised face, swollen beyond recognition. The police report claimed he had resisted arrest and fell repeatedly during apprehension. The hospital records told a different story. A knock at his door interrupted his concentration. "Come in," he called, not looking up from the files. Chief Judge William Martinez entered, his face tight with concern. "Mike, we need to talk." Thompson gestured to a chair. "The police association's been making noise?" "More than noise." Martinez dropped a newspaper on top of the photos. The headline screamed, "Police Association questions judge's objectivity in brutality case." "They're not even trying to be subtle anymore," Thompson said, picking up the paper. "Reynolds is running his mouth to anyone who'll listen. Says you've got a personal agenda." Martinez leaned forward. "Mike, maybe you should consider." "Don't." Thompson's voice was sharp. "Don't say it, Bill. I'm thinking about your safety. Reynolds has friends. Dangerous friends." Thompson stood, walking to his window. Below, another group of officers had gathered on the courthouse steps. "If I step down, I prove them right. Every doubt, every whisper about whether a black judge can be trusted to be impartial. It all becomes true." His phone buzzed. A text from Sarah, Officer Reynolds in lobby, making statements to press. Thompson turned on the small TV in his office. Reynolds's face filled the screen, his expression a mask of righteous indignation. "Judge Thompson has a clear bias against law enforcement," Reynolds was saying. "His background, his history of rulings, it's all part of a pattern. He's using this case to push his own agenda." Martinez muted the TV. "He's trying to force your hand. He's trying to protect himself." Thompson pulled out another file. "Look at this." He spread out a series of internal affairs reports. Each detailed complaints against Reynolds. Excessive force, racial slurs, falsified reports. All mysteriously disappeared or were marked unfounded. "Where did you get these?" Martinez asked, eyes widening. "Anonymous delivery. Someone inside the department wants the truth to come out." Thompson tapped the reports. "This goes beyond Reynolds. There's a whole system of cover-ups." His phone buzzed again. Another anonymous text, "Back off the case. Final warning." Thompson showed Martinez the message. "They're getting desperate. They're getting dangerous," Martinez corrected. The last judge who challenged the police union had his brake lines cut. That was never proven because nobody dared investigate it. A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window, they watched as a group of protesters arrived, carrying signs supporting the police. Reynolds stood among them, arms crossed, staring up at Thompson's window. "He's playing to the cameras," Martinez observed. "He's playing a dangerous game," Thompson replied. He returned to his desk, pulling out more files. "Look at these witness statements. 3 separate accounts of Reynolds and his partners using excessive force, all within the last year. All victims were minorities. All complaints were buried." "Mike," Martinez's voice was heavy with concern. "I know what you're going to say, Bill. That sometimes we have to pick our battles. That some fights aren't worth the cost." Thompson looked his friend in the eye. "But if we don't fight this battle, right here, right now, then what the hell are we doing wearing these robes?" A sharp knock interrupted them. Sarah entered, her face pale. "Judge Thompson, you need to see this." She handed him her tablet. On the screen was a social media post. His home address, along with the message, "Time to remind some people where they belong." Martinez stood. "That's it. I'm assigning you protection." Thompson waved him off. "They're trying to intimidate me. I won't give them the satisfaction." "This isn't about satisfaction, Mike. This is about survival." Thompson's computer pinged. A new email arrived, subject line: "Reynolds case, confidential." Inside was a video file. He clicked play. The footage was grainy from a body camera. Reynolds and 2 other officers surrounding a handcuffed man. The audio was clear. Racial slurs, laughter, the sound of fists meeting flesh. "My God," Martinez whispered. Thompson's jaw clenched. "This is what they're trying to hide. This is why they want me off the case." His desk phone rang. Sarah's voice came through. "Judge, Officer Reynolds is demanding to approach the bench. He says he has new evidence that needs to be presented immediately." Thompson and Martinez exchanged looks. "He's getting reckless," Martinez said. "Good." Thompson straightened his robe. "Reckless people make mistakes. They also get dangerous. Then it's a good thing I've got truth on my side." Thompson gathered the files. And 20 years of experience dealing with bullies in uniform. As they walked toward the courtroom, officers lining the hallway parted silently. Some turned their backs. Others stared openly, hands resting on their weapons. At the courtroom doors, Martinez grabbed Thompson's arm. "Mike, please. Be careful." Thompson nodded, then pushed open the doors. Reynolds stood at the prosecutor's table, a thick envelope in his hands. His face showed a mixture of anger and something else, fear. "Your Honor," Reynolds started, his voice carrying a threat disguised as respect. "Save it, Officer Reynolds." Thompson took his seat. "You wanted to present new evidence? Let's see it." Reynolds hesitated, then approached the bench. As he set the envelope down, he leaned close. "You really want to do this, Your Honor? Really want to start a war you can't win?" Thompson met his gaze steadily. "Officer Reynolds, the war started long before either of us entered this courtroom. The only question is, are you ready for the truth to come out?" Reynolds's face darkened. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." "No, Officer Reynolds." Thompson picked up the envelope. "I believe it's you who doesn't understand what you're dealing with. Shall we proceed?" The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courtroom floor, but Thompson saw everything clearly now. The lines were drawn. The battle was joined, and he was ready for whatever came next. In his hands, the envelope contained either a threat or evidence. Either way, it would change everything. Thompson broke the seal, aware that every eye in the courtroom was fixed on him, waiting to see who would blink first in this dangerous game of justice versus power. The real question wasn't whether he would survive this fight. The question was whether justice would. The courtroom hummed with tension on Monday morning. Every bench was filled, half with uniformed officers, half with community members and press. The air felt thick, like the moment before a storm breaks. Judge Thompson surveyed the scene from his chamber's window. "Sarah, are the security measures in place?" "Yes, Your Honor. Metal detectors at every entrance, additional marshals posted." She hesitated, but most of the officers refused to check their weapons. "Of course they did." Thompson adjusted his robe. "Any sign of Reynolds?" Front row. With his union representative, Thompson nodded, checking his watch. 9:58 a.m. Time to begin. The walk to the courtroom felt like crossing enemy territory. Officers lined the walls, their faces hard, hands resting casually near their weapons. Thompson kept his eyes forward, spine straight. All rise. The bailiff's voice cut through the murmurs. The Superior Court of Boston is now in session, the Honorable Judge Michael Thompson presiding. Thompson took his seat, facing the crowded room. Reynolds sat in the front row, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. Behind him, rows of blue uniforms created a wall of hostile solidarity. Be seated, Thompson commanded. We're here to continue the hearing regarding Commonwealth versus Davidson. Case number 2025, CR 0789. He turned to the prosecutor. Ms. Rodriguez, you may proceed. The young prosecutor stood, clutching her notes. Your Honor, the state calls Detective James Martinez to the stand. A veteran officer approached the witness box, his face carefully neutral. After being sworn in, he settled into the chair, avoiding eye contact with both Thompson and Reynolds. Detective Martinez, Rodriguez began, please tell the court about your investigation of the Davidson incident. Martinez cleared his throat. We received a call about a suspicious person in the Roxbury neighborhood. Officers Reynolds and Parker responded. Objection. Reynolds' attorney jumped up. Detective Martinez wasn't present at the scene. This is hearsay. Detective Martinez led the internal investigation, Rodriguez countered. His testimony is directly relevant. Overruled, Thompson stated. Continued Detective. Martinez shifted uncomfortably. The suspect, Mr. Davidson, allegedly resisted arrest. The officers used force to subdue him. He sustained injuries during the arrest. What kind of injuries? Multiple contusions, 3 broken ribs, orbital fracture. Your Honor. Reynolds suddenly stood, ignoring his attorney's attempt to pull him back down. This is bullshit. Officer Reynolds, sit down. Thompson warned, his voice sharp. No, I won't sit down. Reynolds' face flushed red. This whole trial is a joke. We all know why you're really pushing this case. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Thompson's gavel cracked against the sound block. Officer Reynolds, this is your final warning. Sit down or be held in contempt. Contempt? Reynolds laughed, a harsh sound. That's rich, coming from you. You want to talk about contempt? Let's talk about how you're using this case to push your radical agenda. Bailiff, Thompson called, but the uniformed officers in the room made no move to intervene. Reynolds stepped into the aisle. You think wearing that robe makes you better than us? Makes you forget what you are? What I am, Thompson's voice cut through the tension, is a judge of this court. And you are out of order. No, you're out of order. Reynolds jabbed a finger toward the bench. You're nothing but a diversity hire playing at justice. You think you can sit up there and judge us? Judge me? The courtroom descended into chaos. Community members shouted in protest while officers stood in solidarity with Reynolds. Thompson's gavel cracked again and again. This court is in session. Thompson's voice boomed over the noise. Anyone who cannot maintain order will be removed. Remove this. Reynolds reached into his jacket. Several things happened at once. Security officers finally moved forward. Reynolds' attorney grabbed his arm. Someone screamed. Thompson remained seated, his face a mask of calm authority. Officer Reynolds, remove your hand from your jacket and step back. Or what? Reynolds sneered. You'll call for backup? Look around, Your Honor. Who do you think is going to help you? The room fell silent, the tension unbearable. Thompson slowly stood, his robe flowing around him like armor. I don't need help. Officer Reynolds, what I need is for you to understand something. He stepped down from the bench, facing Reynolds directly. This isn't about me. This isn't about you. This is about justice. And justice doesn't care what color either of us is. Justice? Reynolds spat the word. You want justice? Here's your justice. He pulled his hand from his jacket, clutching not a weapon, but a thick file. He threw it onto the floor, papers scattering across the courtroom. 20 years of complaints against me, all buried. You think you found corruption? You haven't seen anything yet. Every judge who tried to touch this got shut down. Every witness disappeared. Every piece of evidence vanished. His voice rose to a shout. You think you're different? You think you can change things? You're nothing. Thompson didn't flinch. Bailiff, take Officer Reynolds into custody. Don't touch me. Reynolds shrugged off the approaching officers. You have no idea what you're starting, Your Honor. No idea what's coming for you. What's coming, Thompson replied calmly, is justice. And if that terrifies you, Officer Reynolds, perhaps you should ask yourself why. Reynolds lunged forward, breaking free from those trying to restrain him. He reached the bench in 2 strides, his face inches from Thompson's. You're dead, he hissed. You hear me? Dead. Just like every other black man who didn't know his place. The words hung in the air like smoke. Thompson met Reynolds's gaze steadily. Officer Brian Reynolds, his voice carried to every corner of the silent room. You are hereby held in contempt of court, and you are under arrest for threatening a federal judge. Finally, court officers moved in, wrestling Reynolds back. As they dragged him away, he continued shouting threats and racial slurs. Thompson returned to his seat, straightening his robe. Court is adjourned until tomorrow morning. His gavel fell one final time. As the room slowly emptied, Thompson remained seated, watching the scattered papers being collected from the floor. Each one represented a buried complaint, a hidden truth, a justice denied. Sarah approached the bench. Your Honor, are you all right? Thompson nodded slowly. Yes, Sarah, I am. He looked at the papers in front of him. But this isn't over. Not by a long shot. Outside his window, the sun had disappeared behind gathering storm clouds. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a warning of what was to come. The battle lines were drawn. The first shots had been fired, and Judge Michael Thompson knew that tomorrow would bring either triumph or tragedy. There would be no middle ground. Chaos erupted the moment Reynolds was dragged from the courtroom. Officers surged forward, shouting protests. The bailiff's radio crackled with urgent calls for backup. Clear the courtroom. Thompson's voice cut through the noise. Now! Sarah rushed to his side. Your Honor, we need to get you out of here. Not yet. Thompson watched as the scene unfolded before him. Several officers had formed a barrier between Reynolds and the court security, their hands hovering near their weapons. He's one of us, someone shouted. You can't treat him like this. Chief Marshal Davis pushed through the crowd. Judge Thompson, we need to move you to a secure location. Stand down. Reynolds' voice boomed from where 2 court officers held him. Nobody touches the judge. Not yet. The threat in his words hung heavy in the air. Thompson remained at his bench, outwardly calm despite his racing heart. Officer Reynolds, Thompson's voice carried authority. Are you attempting to incite a riot in my courtrooms? Your courtroom? Reynolds laughed bitterly. Look around, Your Honor. Whose courtroom is it really? More than half the officers in the room had moved to stand with Reynolds. The few remaining court security officers looked uncertain, outnumbered. This is your last chance, Thompson addressed the room. Clear the court, or every officer present will be charged with contempt. Charge us all then, Reynolds sneered. See how long you last without police protection in this city. Sarah tugged at Thompson's sleeve. Judge, please. It's not safe. A commotion at the courtroom doors drew everyone's attention. SWAT team members poured in, their presence immediately shifting the power dynamic. Everybody down, the SWAT commander ordered. Hands where we can see them. The tension crackled like electricity. For a moment, it seemed the officers might resist. Then, slowly, hands raised. This isn't over, Reynolds called as SWAT officers approached him. Not by a long shot, Your Honor. Thompson stood, his robe flowing around him. Officer Reynolds, let me be clear. Your threats, your attempts at intimidation, they change nothing. Justice will be served. Justice? Reynolds spat. You want to talk about justice? Tell that to the families of dead cops. Tell that to the officers who get shot serving warrants in neighborhoods where people like you stir up hatred against us. People like me? Thompson's voice was cold. You mean judges? Or did you have something else in mind, Officer Reynolds? The SWAT team began clearing the room, separating the hostile officers from Reynolds. Outside, media vans had already begun arriving, their lights visible through the high windows. Chief Judge Martinez burst in through the side door. "Mike, are you all right?" "I'm fine, Bill." Thompson watched as Reynolds was finally escorted out. "But we have a serious problem. More than you know." Martinez lowered his voice. "The police union is calling an emergency meeting. They're threatening a blue flu. Officers calling in sick en masse. Because I held one corrupt officer in contempt? Because you're exposing a system they've worked decades to protect." Martinez ran a hand through his hair. "The commissioner's on his way. This is becoming a political powder keg." Thompson's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You were warned. The blood's on your hands now." Sarah, reading over his shoulder, gasped. "Your Honor, we need to call the FBI. They're already here." Martinez gestured to two men in suits entering the courtroom. "And the governor's office is involved now." The SWAT commander approached. "Judge Thompson, we've secured the building, but there's a situation outside. Several hundred officers are gathering. They're calling for your removal from the bench." Thompson moved to the window. The courthouse steps where a sea of blue uniform signs were already appearing. "Support our police," and "No biased judges." "They're really going to do this," Thompson said quietly. "They're going to try to shut down the entire justice system to protect their own." The FBI agents approached. "Your Honor, we need to discuss security arrangements. We have credible threats against you." "How credible?" "Enough that we're moving you to a safe house tonight." Thompson shook his head. "No, I'm not running." "Mike," Martinez pleaded, "be reasonable." "I am being reasonable." Thompson turned to face them. "The moment I go into hiding is the moment they win. The moment they prove that threats and intimidation can override justice." A crash from outside made everyone jump. Through the window, they could see protesters clashing with riot police. "Your Honor," one FBI agent insisted, "we can't guarantee your safety here." "My safety?" Thompson laughed softly. "My safety was compromised the moment I put on this robe. The moment I dared to believe that justice should be truly blind." The courthouse speakers crackled to life. "Attention, all personnel. The building is now in lockdown. All non-essential personnel must evacuate immediately." Sarah clutched a stack of files. "The evidence from Reynolds' case. We need to secure it." "Already done," the FBI agent assured her. "We've taken custody of all case materials." Thompson returned to his bench, sitting heavily. The room had cleared except for security personnel and the FBI agents. "What's our next move?" Martinez asked. "We proceed." Thompson's voice was firm. "Tomorrow morning, as scheduled. This court will not be intimidated. They'll come back in force," the SWAT commander warned. "Let them come." Thompson straightened his robe. "Let them show the world exactly who they are and what they're willing to do to obstruct justice." His phone buzzed again. Another message. "Last chance. Step down or step into a coffin." Thompson placed the phone face down on his bench. Outside, the chants grew louder. The storm was no longer approaching. It had arrived. And in its center sat Judge Michael Thompson, a man who had spent 20 years fighting for justice, now facing the fight of his life. "Sarah," he called, "give me everything we have on police misconduct cases from the past decade. Every complaint, every buried report." "You're really going to do this?" Martinez asked. Thompson met his friend's worried gaze. "Bill, we're not just fighting for one case anymore. We're fighting for the very concept of justice itself." The lights flickered as another crash sounded outside. In the growing darkness, Thompson could see his reflection in the window, a black man in a judge's robe, standing against a tide of blue. The battle lines had been drawn. Now it was time to see who would break first, the thin blue line or the scales of justice. Thompson's footsteps echoed through his empty house. The FBI had swept it for bugs and surveillance devices, finding none. Still, shadows seemed to move in every corner. He dropped his briefcase on the kitchen counter, his security detail taking positions outside. Their presence should have been reassuring. Instead, it felt like a countdown. The TV flickered to life with a click of the remote. Every channel showed the same scenes. Hundreds of police officers surrounding the courthouse, Reynolds being led away in cuffs, signs demanding Thompson's removal. "Breaking news," the anchor announced. Sources within the Boston Police Department reveal widespread support for Officer Brian Reynolds, with many officers threatening to walk off the job if Judge Michael Thompson continues to preside over the case. Thompson muted the TV, moving to his study. Files covered his desk, 2 decades of police misconduct cases. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from other judges, lawyers, activists. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone wanted a piece of this fight. A knock at the front door made him freeze. Judge Thompson called one of his FBI protection detail. Chief Judge Martinez is here. Thompson checked his watch. 11:45 p.m. Let him in. Martinez looked exhausted as he entered, carrying a thick folder. You need to see this, Mike. More threats? Worse. Martinez spread photos across Thompson's desk. These were taken outside Reynolds' precinct an hour ago. They're organizing. The images showed dozens of police cruisers, officers in tactical gear, weapons being distributed. They're preparing for war, Thompson said quietly. They're preparing to make sure you can't reach the courthouse tomorrow. Martinez rubbed his eyes. The governor's office called. They're suggesting you take a leave of absence. Let things cool down. Thompson's laugh was bitter. Cool down? This has been heating up for decades, Bill. Every time we look the other way, every time we let them police themselves, we helped build this moment. His phone buzzed again. A video message. Thompson clicked play. The screen showed Reynolds still in custody, speaking directly to the camera. Judge Thompson thinks he can change the system. But he's about to learn what happens to people who try to police the police. Tomorrow, we show him what real power looks like. Jesus, Martinez whispered. How did he get a phone in custody? You really have to ask? Thompson tossed the phone aside. The whole system is compromised. A crash outside made them both jump. One of the FBI agents burst in. Just a protester throwing rocks, Your Honor. We got it handled. Thompson moved to the window. Police cars crawled past his house, slow and menacing. Some stopped completely. Officers watching his home through binoculars. Mike, Martinez's voice was gentle. Maybe you should consider. Don't. Thompson turned from the window. Don't tell me to back down. Don't tell me to be reasonable. I'm telling you to stay alive. Another crash, closer this time. The FBI agent's radio crackled with urgent voices. Thompson's landline rang, a number he'd almost forgotten he had. He put it on speaker. Hello, Your Honor. Reynolds' voice filled the room. Comfortable in your fortress? Martinez grabbed his phone, signaling the FBI agents. Officer Reynolds, Thompson kept his voice steady. I see you're enjoying your phone privileges in custody. Custody? Reynolds laughed. You really think any cell in Boston can hold me? We own this city, Judge. Always have. Is that a confession of escape, Officer Reynolds? It's a reality check. Look outside. See all those cars? Those are my brothers. My family. What do you have? Thompson's grip tightened on the phone. I have the law. The law. Reynolds spat. The law is what we say it is. Always has been. You're just too blind to see it. Or maybe too arrogant. Are you finished? No, Your Honor. I'm just getting started. Tomorrow morning, when you try to reach that courthouse, if you're stupid enough to try, you're going to learn exactly how much your precious law is worth in the real world. The line went dead. Martinez was already on his phone. We need to move him. Now. Safe house. Full protection. No. Thompson sat at his desk. Mike, this is suicide. This is justice. Thompson opened his laptop. And if they want to stop justice, they'll have to do it in broad daylight in front of the whole world. His email pinged. The subject line read, Police corruption evidence. Urgent. Inside was a video file and a message. Judge Thompson, what they did to Davidson wasn't the first time. We've been collecting evidence for years. Some of us want the truth to come out. Be careful who you trust. The video showed Reynolds and other officers during multiple arrests. The pattern was clear. Excessive force, racial slurs, planted evidence. My God, Martinez breathed, watching over Thompson's shoulder. Now you understand. Thompson turned to his friend. This isn't about one case anymore. This is about breaking the whole damn system wide open. More cars gathered outside. More rocks against windows. The FBI agents looked increasingly nervous. Thompson's phone buzzed one final time. A message from Sarah. Your Honor, please be careful. But don't give up. We're with you. He stood, moving to the window again. The street was lined with police vehicles now, their lights painting his walls in shifting patterns of red and blue. They think they can intimidate me, he said quietly. They think they can make me forget 20 years on the bench. 20 years of watching them twist justice into whatever shape suited them. Mike, no, Bill. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to that courthouse. I'm going to sit on that bench, and I'm going to show them that justice doesn't bend to threats. Martinez sighed heavily. Then I'll be there with you. Outside, an officer raised a megaphone. Judge Thompson, this is your last warning. Recuse yourself or face the consequences. Thompson didn't respond. He just watched, remembering every case he'd presided over, every time he'd seen justice perverted, every brown and black face that had looked to him for fairness in an unfair system. Tomorrow would change everything, one way or another. The dark hours ticked by, each bringing him closer to a confrontation 20 years in the making. And as the night deepened, Judge Michael Thompson prepared for the fight of his life, not just for his own justice, but for the very soul of the system he'd sworn to serve. Dawn broke over Boston, painting the sky in shades of gray. Thompson stood in his study, adjusting his tie in a reflection of his window. The street below remained lined with police vehicles, their occupants waiting, watching. His phone rang. Your Honor, Sarah's voice was tense. They've blocked all approaches to the courthouse. At least 50 police cruisers at every intersection. Any sign of Reynolds? No, but his supporters are everywhere. They're wearing shirts with his badge number. Thompson checked his watch. 6:45 a.m. Court was scheduled for 9 o'clock. Sarah, I need you to do something for me. Get that evidence file we received last night to every major news outlet in the city. And the FBI. Already done, Your Honor. But she hesitated. There's something else. Someone left a package at the courthouse steps. What kind of package? A noose, Your Honor. With your name on it? Thompson's jaw tightened. Outside, an officer raised a megaphone again. Final warning, Judge. Stay home today if you know what's good for you. His security detail entered the study. Your Honor, we need to move now if we're going to attempt reaching the courthouse. Attempt? Thompson turned from the window. We're not attempting anything. We're going to that courthouse. Sir, they've got every route blocked, even with FBI support. Then we'll walk. Thompson grabbed his robe. Let them try to stop a federal judge from reaching his courthouse in broad daylight. His phone buzzed. A video message from an unknown number. Reynolds appeared on screen, looking freshly showered despite supposedly being in custody. Morning, Your Honor. Beautiful day for justice, isn't it? His smile was cold. Last chance to do this the easy way. Sign the recusal papers, admit your bias, walk away. Or, he held up a photo of Thompson's late wife. Well, accidents happen, don't they? Thompson's hands shook as he deleted the message. The photo had been taken from his bedroom dresser during the night. They were in my house, he said quietly. The FBI agent in charge stepped forward. We're sweeping the house again now, Your Honor. But this means they're desperate. Thompson slipped into his judicial robe. And desperate people make mistakes. His phone rang again. Chief Judge Martinez. Mike, turn on the news. Now. Thompson clicked on the TV. Live footage showed hundreds of officers surrounding the courthouse, many in riot gear. The caption read, Police protest escalates. Officers threaten mass resignation. I count at least 12 captains in that crowd, Martinez said. The entire command structure is backing Reynolds. Of course they are. He knows where all the bodies are buried. A notification popped up on his phone. The evidence file Sarah had distributed was going viral. Hashtag police corruption and hashtag Judge Thompson were trending nationwide. The world is watching now, Thompson said. No turning back. His security detail conferred quietly, then approached. Your Honor, we've mapped a potential route. Underground parking garages, service corridors. We might be able to... No. Thompson straightened his robe. We walk in through the front door. In broad daylight. Let them show the world who they really are. Sir, that's suicide. That's justice. Thompson moved toward his front door. And if they want to stop justice, they'll have to do it where everyone can see. Outside, the morning sun illuminated a sea of blue uniforms. Officers turned to watch as Thompson emerged, flanked by FBI agents. "There he is," someone shouted. Thompson walked steadily down his front steps. The crowd of officers parted slightly, creating a path lined with hostile faces. "Going somewhere, Your Honor?" An officer stepped forward, hand resting on his weapon. "To my courthouse, officer. Would you like to explain why you're blocking my way?" "Just following orders, Your Honor. Like we always do." "And whose orders would those be, officer?" "Last I checked, the police department doesn't outrank the federal judiciary." More officers moved in, tightening the circle. Thompson's security detail tensed. His phone buzzed one last time. A text from Sarah. "Evidence is spreading, Your Honor. Major networks picking it up. Keep going." Thompson took another step forward. "Let me be very clear. Every officer who attempts to prevent a federal judge from reaching his courthouse is committing a felony. One that carries mandatory prison time." "Prison?" Someone laughed. "Who's going to arrest us?" "Your Honor." "No," Thompson replied calmly. "The FBI agents currently photographing every face in this crowd. The federal marshals recording every badge number. The news helicopters broadcasting this obstruction of justice to the entire nation." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across some faces. Officers glanced up, noticing the helicopters circling overhead. Thompson's voice carried across the crowd. 20 years I've sat on that bench. 20 years I've watched good cops stay silent while bad cops poison the system. 20 years of looking the other way, telling ourselves it was just a few bad apples." He took another step forward. "Well, today we see the whole orchard. Today, every American watching can see exactly what happens when police decide they're above the law." "We are the law," someone shouted. "No." Thompson's voice was steel. "You're its servants, just like me. And if you've forgotten that, then it's time for a reminder." He walked forward again. The crowd shifted, uncertain now. "Every officer who blocks my path will be named in a federal obstruction indictment. Every supervisor who ordered this will face conspiracy charges." "And Officer Reynolds?" Thompson smiled coldly. "Well, he's about to learn what real justice looks like." His phone lit up with notifications. The evidence was spreading faster now. Hashtag police brutality top trending topics. News vans appeared at both ends of the street. "Last chance," Thompson announced. "Step aside and let justice through. Or step forward and show the world exactly who you are." The moment stretched, taut with tension. Then, slowly, a path began to open. Thompson walked forward, his robe flowing behind him, each step carrying him closer to a confrontation that would change everything. Behind him, he heard an officer mutter, "Reynolds isn't going to like this." "No," Thompson said quietly, "he isn't." And that's exactly the point. The courthouse loomed ahead, its steps lined with more officers. But now news cameras rolled, capturing every moment. The whole world was watching. Justice was coming, and not even an army in blue could stop it now. The courthouse steps loomed before Thompson like a mountain. Each step forward drew more camera flashes, more shouted questions from reporters. His security detail formed a tight circle around him. "Judge Thompson, will you be recusing yourself?" "Your Honor." "Any response to the police union's allegations?" "Judge, is it true Officer Reynolds has escaped custody?" Thompson kept his eyes forward, focused on the massive wooden doors ahead. More officers lined the steps, their faces a mix of hostility and uncertainty. "Hold up, Your Honor." A sergeant stepped forward, hand raised. "Buildings closed for security concerns." Thompson didn't break stride. "I have a federal court session scheduled for 9 a.m., Sergeant." "Step aside." "Sir, we have credible threats. The only credible threat I see," Thompson's voice carried to the cameras, "is a group of officers attempting to obstruct federal justice. Now, one last time. Step aside." The sergeant's radio crackled. A familiar voice cut through the static. "Don't let him in that courtroom." Thompson smiled coldly. "Officer Reynolds, I thought you were in custody." More radio static. "This ends now, Your Honor. One way or another." "Oh, it ends today?" Thompson agreed. But not the way you think. He reached the doors, FBI agents moving to open them. Inside, the courthouse lobby was eerily empty except for more uniformed officers. Sarah waited by the security checkpoint, clutching a stack of files. Your Honor, the evidence videos have gone viral. Every major network is running them. Good. Thompson nodded to his security detail. Let's proceed. They moved toward his courtroom, footsteps echoing through the marble halls. Officers lining the corridor turned their backs as he passed. Real professional, an FBI agent muttered. Let them, Thompson replied. The cameras are getting every moment. His courtroom doors stood open. Inside, every bench was filled with officers in uniform. In the center aisle stood Brian Reynolds. Surprised to see me, Your Honor? Thompson walked calmly to his bench. The only surprise, Officer Reynolds, is that you think this display of force changes anything, changes everything. Reynolds smiled. Look around. You really think you can win this? This isn't about winning. Thompson took his seat. This is about justice. Justice? Reynolds laughed. Tell that to the officers who die keeping your streets safe. Tell that to James Davidson. Thompson cut him off. Tell that to every citizen beaten, framed, or killed by officers who forgot their oath. The room tensed. Reynolds' face darkened. You want to talk about oaths? Reynolds stepped forward. How about your oath to be impartial? We all know why you took this case. Yes, Thompson agreed. Because it was assigned to me. Just like every other case in this court. Bullshit. Reynolds slammed his hand on the prosecution table. You took it because you've got an agenda. Because you want to tear down the whole system. The system. Thompson leaned forward. Officer Reynolds, you're not defending a system. You're defending corruption. And today, that ends. He nodded to Sarah, who began distributing files to the news media present. What you're holding, Thompson addressed the reporters, is evidence of a decades-long pattern of misconduct, abuse, and cover-ups within the Boston Police Department. Reynolds lunged forward. You can't. I can and I am. Thompson's voice filled the room. Officer Brian Reynolds, you are under arrest for escaping custody, threatening a federal judge, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. You really think these charges will stick? Reynolds sneered. Look around. Who's going to arrest me? The courtroom doors burst open. Federal marshals flooded in, followed by state police tactical units. That would be us, announced the marshal in charge. Brian Reynolds, hands where we can see them. Reynolds spun around, facing his fellow officers. Brothers, are we going to let them do this? No one moved. Brothers? Reynolds' voice rose. After everything we've done for each other? All the times we've covered for each other? Covered for each other? Thompson's voice was sharp. Would you like to elaborate on that, Officer Reynolds? Reynolds turned back, his face contorted with rage. You smug son of a... Choose your next words carefully, Thompson warned. They're being broadcast live across the nation. Reynolds finally noticed the news cameras, the phones recording every moment. His facade cracked. You set me up? No. Officer Reynolds, you set yourself up. 20 years of brutality. 20 years of corruption. 20 years of thinking your badge made you untouchable. Thompson stood, his robe flowing around him. Today, you learn what real justice looks like. Today, every American watching learns that no one, not even the police, is above the law. Reynolds reached into his jacket. Gun, someone shouted. But before anyone could move, state police tackled Reynolds from behind. The weapon skittered across the floor, a backup pistol, small but deadly. Add attempted murder of a federal judge to the charges, Thompson said calmly. As Reynolds was dragged away, Thompson addressed the stunned officers in his courtroom. Let this be a lesson. The blue wall of silence ends today. Every officer who participated in this attempted obstruction of justice will face charges. Every supervisor who ordered it will be prosecuted. He lifted a file from his bench. In this folder is evidence of 342 incidents of police misconduct, brutality, and corruption. All buried. All hidden behind that blue wall. Until today. The room was silent now. Every face turned toward him. Some of you joined the force to serve and protect. Some of you still believe in justice. To you I say, it's time to choose. Stand with corruption or stand with the law. One by one, officers began removing their protest badges. Some quietly left the courtroom. Others remained seated, heads bowed. Thompson's gavel cracked against the sound block. This court is now in session, and justice will be served. Outside, the morning sun finally broke through the clouds, streaming through the high windows. A new day was dawning, not just for Boston, but for justice itself. The reckoning had begun, and nothing would ever be the same. The holding cell door clanged shut behind Reynolds. Not a police precinct cell this time. A federal detention center watched by U.S. Marshals who had no connection to the Boston Police Department. "How's it feel?" Thompson asked, standing outside the cell. "Being on the other side of those bars?" Reynolds sat on the metal bench, his uniform replaced by an orange jumpsuit. "You've started a war you can't win." "The war started long before today," Thompson replied. "The only difference is now everyone can see it." He held up his phone, showing Reynolds the news headlines. Police corruption exposed. Hundreds of cases to be reviewed. Boston Police Department under federal investigation. Judge Thompson reveals decades of systemic abuse. "You think this changes anything?" Reynolds laughed bitterly. "You think a few headlines will fix a system built on—" He stopped himself. "Built on what, Officer Reynolds? Built on racism? Corruption? The assumption that you're above the law." Reynolds stood, approaching the bars. "Built on necessity. You sit in your high castle, judging us. You have no idea what it takes to keep order on these streets." "Order?" Thompson's voice was sharp. "Is that what you call beating unarmed civilians? Planting evidence? Using racial slurs while you violate people's rights? You've never worked the streets? Never had to make split-second decisions?" "No," Thompson cut him off. "I've just spent 20 years cleaning up the aftermath of those decisions. 20 years watching officers like you hide behind your badge while you terrorize the communities you're supposed to protect." His phone buzzed. A message from Sarah. "Your Honor, the police commissioner is calling an emergency press conference. And the FBI just arrived with more files. Looks like your brothers in blue are starting to talk," Thompson told Reynolds. Amazing how quickly that wall of silence crumbles when people realize they might face consequences. Reynolds gripped the bars. "You're destroying everything we built." "Good." Thompson turned to leave. "It needs to be destroyed." Back in his chambers, Thompson found Sarah surrounded by boxes of files. FBI agents were setting up computers, scanning documents. "3 more officers have come forward," she reported. "They're confirming everything. The cover-ups, the planted evidence, the unofficial quotas targeting minority neighborhoods." "And the commissioner?" About to throw Reynolds under the bus, she handed him a draft of the commissioner's statement. "They're calling him a rogue officer who doesn't represent our values." Thompson scanned the document. Convenient how they're forgetting 20 years of protecting him. His phone rang. "Chief Judge Martinez." "Mike, the governor wants to meet. He's talking about a special commission on police reform. He wants you to head it." Thompson sat heavily in his chair. "A commission? They think this can be fixed with meetings and reports?" "It's a start. The political winds are shifting. People are angry. They want change." Through his window, Thompson could see protesters gathering. Not angry officers this time, but citizens demanding justice. Their signs read, "Thank you, Judge Thompson," and "No one above the law." His computer pinged with a new email. More evidence, this time from within the department's Internal Affairs Division. Screenshots of text messages showing supervisors ordering investigations buried. Witnesses intimidated, complaints lost. "Your Honor." Sarah appeared in his doorway. "James Davidson is here. He'd like to speak with you." Thompson nodded. "Send him in." Davidson entered slowly, still bearing the scars of his encounter with Reynolds. His face was healing, but the psychological wounds were clear in his eyes. "Judge Thompson." Davidson's voice was quiet. "I wanted to thank you." "Don't thank me, Mr. Davidson. I'm just doing my job." "No." Davidson shook his head. "You're doing more than that. You're giving us hope. For the first time, someone with power is actually listening." Thompson gestured to a chair. "Tell me everything that happened that night. Not what's in the police report. What really happened?" For the next hour, Davidson spoke. He described the casual cruelty, the racial slurs, The moment he realized the officers weren't going to just arrest him, they were going to hurt him. And the worst part? Davidson's voice cracked. I knew nobody would believe me. It was their word against mine. Until now. Thompson's phone hadn't stopped buzzing. More evidence. More officers coming forward. More cases being reopened. Sarah knocked and entered. Your Honor, there's something you need to see. She turned on the TV. The police commissioner stood at a podium, sweating under the lights. In light of recent revelations, I am announcing my immediate resignation. The acts of corruption and misconduct revealed by Judge Thompson are inexcusable. I take full responsibility for the failures of leadership that allowed. Thompson muted the TV. Rats fleeing a sinking ship. It's not just him, Sarah reported. 3 deputy commissioners, 5 captains, and dozens of supervisors have all submitted resignations. And Reynolds? Singing like a bird to the FBI. Naming names, dates, incidents. Everything. Davidson watched the TV silently. Will it last? The changes? That depends, Thompson replied. On whether we keep pushing. On whether people stay angry enough to demand real reform. His phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. Thank you for showing us what real courage looks like. Officer M. More messages flooded in. Citizens sharing their stories of police abuse. Officers confessing to witnessing misconduct. Judges from other cities asking for guidance on similar cases. The ripples were becoming waves. Your Honor. Sarah appeared again. The media is requesting a formal statement, and the governor is waiting to discuss the Reform Commission. Thompson stood straightening his robe. Tell them I'll be right there. He turned to Davidson. This isn't over. Change doesn't happen overnight. But for the first time in 20 years, I believe it's possible. Davidson nodded. Because you stood up. Because you showed us that justice isn't just a word. No, Thompson agreed. It's not a word. It's a choice. A choice we make every day to do what's right despite the cost. He gathered his files, preparing to face the cameras again. The aftermath of his stand was still unfolding, spreading outward like ripples in a pond. But for the first time in decades, those ripples carried hope. 1 month after Reynolds' arrest, Judge Michael Thompson sat in his chambers reviewing applications. Not case files this time, applications for the new Police Oversight Committee he'd been appointed to lead. Another former officer wants to join, Sarah said, adding a folder to his desk. Says he witnessed misconduct for years, but stayed quiet. Wants to make it right? Thompson picked up the application. How many is that now? 38. Mostly younger officers, tired of the old system. She paused. Reynolds' sentencing is tomorrow. Thompson nodded. The plea deal had been controversial. Reynolds would serve time, but more importantly, he testified against dozens of other corrupt officers. The blue wall of silence had crumbled into dust. His phone buzzed. A text from James Davidson. Just got approved to join the Citizen Review Board. Thank you for everything. A knock at his door interrupted his reply. Chief Judge Martinez entered, looking tired but satisfied. Final numbers are in, Martinez announced. 212 officers forced to resign. 43 facing criminal charges. Over 1,000 cases being reviewed for misconduct. And the reforms? Governor signed them into law this morning. Independent oversight, mandatory body cameras, civilian review boards with real power. Martinez sat heavily. It's really happening, Mike. Thompson stood, moving to his window. The courthouse steps were clear now. No angry officers, no protesters. Just citizens going about their business, trusting that justice would be served inside these walls. Your Honor. Sarah appeared in the doorway. They're ready for you in the conference room. Thompson gathered his files. Today was the first meeting of the Reform Committee, a mix of community leaders, former officers, civil rights attorneys, and citizens who'd experienced police abuse firsthand. As he walked the courthouse corridors, officers nodded respectfully. Not the old guard. They'd largely resigned or been forced out. These were new faces, young officers who'd chosen justice over the thin blue line. The conference room was packed. Thompson recognized faces from the headlines of the past month. Whistleblower cops, community activists, even a few former prosecutors who'd helped expose the corruption. Before we begin, Thompson addressed the room. I want to be clear about something. What happened last month wasn't about one judge taking a stand. It wasn't about one corrupt officer or one broken department. He looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes. It was about choosing justice over comfort, truth over tradition, right over easy. And that choice isn't a one-time thing. We have to make it every single day. His phone buzzed. A news alert. Former Officer Reynolds to face sentencing tomorrow. Dozens of additional officers implicated in testimony. Some people think the hard part is over, Thompson continued. They think that because we expose the corruption, because we pass some new laws, everything will magically fix itself. Heads nodded around the room. But real change isn't about laws on paper. It's about choices made in the moment. It's about officers choosing to report misconduct instead of covering it up. About prosecutors choosing to pursue justice instead of convictions. About judges choosing to question authority instead of rubber stamping it. Sarah entered quietly, handing him a note. More officers had come forward, revealing corruption in departments across the state. The ripples are still spreading, Thompson told the room. Other cities are looking at what happened here. Other departments are facing their own reckonings. But change only happens if we choose it. Every day, every case, every moment. His phone buzzed again. A text from Martinez. Reynolds just fired his lawyer. Says he wants to address the court directly tomorrow. Thompson set his phone aside. Yesterday, someone asked me if I was afraid. Afraid of retaliation. Afraid of making enemies. Afraid of changing a system that's been in place for generations. He paused, looking out the window at the city beyond. And I told him the truth. Yes, I'm afraid. But I'm more afraid of what happens if we don't change. More afraid of looking into the eyes of another James Davidson, another victim of abuse, and telling them that justice isn't for them. The room was silent, hanging on his words. So yes, I'm afraid. But fear doesn't matter. Justice matters. Truth matters. Doing what's right matters. His computer pinged. An email from the governor's office. Police departments across the state were adopting the Thompson protocols for oversight and accountability. Tomorrow, Officer Reynolds will face sentencing. Some people think that's the end of this story. They're wrong. This isn't an ending. It's a beginning. He opened his files, laying out the plans for reform. Today we start building something new. Not just oversight committees and review boards, but a new understanding of what justice means. A new commitment to holding everyone accountable, regardless of their badge or their position or their power. Sarah entered again, this time with breaking news. 3 more police departments had requested federal oversight, wanting to clean house before their own Reynolds emerged. The world is watching what we do here, Thompson told the room. Not just how we punish past wrongs, but how we prevent future ones. Not just how we change laws, but how we change cultures. He stood, his robe flowing around him. 20 years ago, I put on this robe believing I could make a difference from the bench. Now I know that real change happens beyond the bench. In rooms like this, in choices like these, in moments when we decide what kind of justice system we want to be. The meeting began in earnest, then discussions of oversight mechanisms, training protocols, community engagement initiatives. But underneath the practical details ran a current of something bigger. Hope. Hope that justice could be more than a word. Hope that change could be more than a promise. Hours later, Thompson stood in his chambers one last time. Tomorrow he would sentence Reynolds, but that wasn't the real end. The real work was just beginning. His phone buzzed one final time. A message from an unknown number. You showed us what courage looks like, Your Honor. We won't forget. Thompson smiled, touching his robe. 20 years on the bench had taught him many things, but the most important lesson was this. Justice wasn't a destination. It was a journey, a choice, a daily commitment to doing what's right, regardless of the cost. And as he prepared to face tomorrow's challenges, Judge Michael Thompson knew the ripples of change would continue spreading, touching lives far beyond his courtroom, far beyond Boston, far beyond this moment. Because justice, real justice, knew no bounds.